Okay, I think we're going to get started. Hello, everyone. My name is Leslie Conter. I'm a client relationship manager in our commercial lines department at Walsh Duffield. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. The Power of Prevention, Mitigating Workers' Comp Risks Through Safety and Best Practices, presented by Joe Coniglio, the president of OSEA Inc. This is our final webinar in the Employee Benefits All That Jazz series. We had a great time hosting and sharing insights at our in-person event and 2 webinars last week. Before I introduce Joe, I'd like to cover a few housekeeping items. Today's webinar is being recorded. We will share a link with you after the event, along with the presentation slides. This presentation is approved for 1 SHRM Professional Development credit. We will email you the code needed for the credit after the webinar. We invite your comments and questions. Please use the Q&A box on your screen. If you think of a question at any point, just type it in there and we will hold it for the discussion portion at the end of the presentation. And with that, I'm happy to introduce today's presenter. Joe Coniglio is the president of OSEA Inc. and the co-founder of the Telesafety app. Joe has more than 15 years of experience in various environmental, health, and safety roles. Joe is a versatile and adaptive individual who utilizes leadership, communication, and interpersonal skills to build teams that meet and exceed goals under time constraints. Leveraging his consultative, solution-oriented approach, Joe has systematically grown his consultative firm, OSEA Inc., and developed a first-to-market app called Telesafety. Joe is viewed as a trusted advisor and subject matter expert in construction safety and mobile strategy. Previously as a captain in the United States Army, Joe served in multiple leadership roles such as battle captain, battalion logistics officer, and platoon leader in both peacetime and combat operations. Today, Joe will be discussing how prevention of workplace injuries and illnesses is essential to protecting both employees and businesses from the financial and reputational costs of workers' compensation claims. We will discuss the importance of having a comprehensive safety program in place to mitigate risk, avoid claims, remain compliant, and ultimately lower workers' compensation costs. At this time, I'm going to hand the floor over to Joe, who is going to start today's presentation.
Thank you, Leslie. Hopefully everybody can hear me. Not, I will look at the chat box, but looks good so far. Thanks for that introduction. Everybody just heard my full LinkedIn profile. So thank you for that. Appreciate it. Again, today we're here to talk about the power of prevention. Prevention in the workplace is an extremely important thing when it comes to safety for many reasons, as we all know. Financial, employees, keeping employees happy, keeping them safe, sending them home at the end of the day so that they can see their families and then come back to our places of business the next day. Accidents in the workplace, we know a single accident causes a major ripple through the mental health and culture of your organization, and it's something that we just don't see, and it's hard to quantify that and determine the actual extent of that injury had on more than just the injured employee. So I don't typically read slides, but as a matter of practice, I just want to read the purpose to you today, make sure we're all here for the same reason. So preventing workplace injuries and illnesses is essential to protect employees and, of course, the business from financial and other costs of workers' compensation claims. In this webinar, we'll discuss the importance of implementing best practices for workplace safety, the benefit of having a comprehensive safety program. We'll share recent trends and discuss ways to mitigate risk, avoid claims, and remain compliant. So that's the purpose. Here's the agenda. A couple of things we'll talk about is Code Rule 59, which is a New York State program. If you have had one, you're probably cringing right now. If you haven't had one, you'll understand why those are cringing in a little bit here. We'll talk about some best practices, how to drive compensation down, cost that is, and then leading and lagging indicators. Again, these are some buzzwords And we can determine how deep we get into these, but I can also really want to determine, or rather discuss, how to get off a baseline with your safety program. I did take a look at the different organizations represented here today, and we have quite the gamut. But I will, ranging from a Fortune 500 manufacturing firm all the way to doctor's offices, dentists. And I will go ahead and tell you that regardless of if you're a Fortune 500 manufacturing company making tanks for the military, or you're cleaning teeth, safety in the workplace is just as important. It's just as serious. Hazards exist in every job. And we can see here that they're costly, right? So here's some statistics. I always like to show you some statistics as to determine why we are here. So these are statistics over a year. 99 million production days lost from accidents. The average cost of a workplace death is about a little over $1 million. A couple other things that people don't think about is, if you don't watch the news about OSHA, their fines have just gone up to $15,000. I've rounded that off from 14 whatever. That's per violation, right? So if an OSHA inspector comes to your place and they see 3 people on your roof without fall protection, potentially could be 3 times 15 grand. I've seen companies go out of business for OSHA violations. And at the same time, my firm has helped defend many of these to the point that one of them was a $500,000 OSHA fine that we had thrown out because we found technical issues in the way that OSHA did their testing. So you get an OSHA citation, much like if you get a ticket from the police, you're not done for at that point. You can still fight for it. But again, we don't want to be there. Excuse me. What's staggering to me is how we're trending in the wrong direction, right? So it doesn't seem that way maybe, but when you look at the statistics, people are getting hurt more seriously and at more of a frequency than we have in the past. And what has that led to? That's led to people not feeling safe on their job. That safety comes from a couple of things. This graph that I'm showing here, again, shows the trending downward as far as how people feel safe at their job. In 2020, it's like 65%, but if you look at 2010, it's almost 80%, right? And what does that tell us? So a couple of things play into that. One is accidents of our employees that other people see. So when you see somebody fall off a ladder and they get hurt, they break a leg, right away, that goes into your what psychologists call your reptilian brain. And every time you see a ladder, that's going to come to the forefront, and you're going to have a feeling of maybe the hair stands up on the back of your neck, or something like that, right? So these things definitely play into it. Watching our friends get hurt. I've had the experience of being in the military, so I've seen this from both sides, civilian and military, and I can tell you that it's the same no matter what industry you're in, how it affects other people, not just the person who got injured. Excuse me. The other part of this that we don't talk about much, although I'm going to tell you a quick story in a second, how I'm hearing more about it now, is the mental health, right? So the mental health outside of the work that we bring in can also make us feel less safe. What are we talking about there? We're talking about, there's multiple wars going on in the world. We just seemingly got through a pandemic, right? You have people losing jobs. Hundreds of thousands of people lost their lives recently. School shootings. There's so much going on that plays into people's heads before they even show up to your job. That just makes it harder for us to employ an accurate and an effective safety program, because we know that their heads are not always in the game. So again, here's some really interesting statistics that, again, I just wanted to point out because these happen in every industry, right? But some of these are really important to look at. So 5% of dehydration can affect your alertness and your concentration by almost 30%, right? Why is that important? If you're running a multi-billion-dollar manufacturing operation, you're thinking, why are we talking about hydration? Well, if you're running a multi-billion-dollar operation and your employees are dehydrated and they're working maybe potentially at 30% less than what they could, that's costing you money, right? Eye injuries. We've seen over 500 hospitalizations per year from eye injuries. When we talk about safety, we want to fix complex problems, and yet here we are talking about eye injuries. How does that happen? Because people don't wear safety glasses, and because we don't force them. That's a simple thing to do. I don't know about anybody on this call, but if I lost my vision, that would create a harm in my life that I just wouldn't be able to get back for a long time. And again, focus back on that mental health. What does that do to me as the employee? What does that do to my friends around me in my shop when they see me lose my vision? So the majority of workplace fatalities, now we're talking fatalities, are vehicle collisions, falls from something hitting them, or the person themselves falling from height, or then being hit by something or a moving object. Those four things, quite honestly, people, are completely preventable, but we have to employ tactics to prevent them. So let's talk about the Code Rule 59. If you've been in a Code Rule 59, you know what this is. If you haven't, here's what we'll talk about. So the Code Rule 59 is a New York State program where they look at your company's EMR, employee modification rating, which I'll tell you about here in a second. And it's for any company that has over 800,000 a year in payroll, and they have an EMR of a 1.2 or higher. 1.0 is considered baseline. The compensation board issues a notice to you, the employer. I can also tell you, and people will chuckle who have been through this, you have to have a certified New York State Code Rule auditor. So they have to be certified by New York State. They're not New York State employees. Have to be certified by the state to conduct this audit. What we know is that when this list comes out, so every certified auditor in New York State will get the list. And there's many people out there who have told me they've gotten 7, 8, 9 phone calls or emails from somebody trying to get their business. I would say that if you get a Code Rule 59 and you're a Walsh client, because I know we have both Walsh and non-Walsh clients in here, call your main contact, right? Because that's what we do for Walsh as OSCA. We're their risk providers. We support their clients in many different ways, and this is one of them. If you're not a Walsh client, you should become a Walsh client, and we will help you through this Code Rule 59 if you get one. I will tell you that in my 15 years of doing these, I have not seen a surcharge until recently. And what do I mean? So there's things that you as the employer have to do if you get a Code Rule 59 in order to exit the program, if you will. When you do that, you go through and you have these tasks to do. Let's say you don't have a safety policy about bloodborne pathogens. So the auditor says that's one thing you need to do. If you don't do that, and then the state comes through and does a backup audit, you could be charged 5% on your comp premium. And again, going back to some of those larger companies, that could be a big ticket. And for the smaller companies, that could be something we just can't pallet financially. So what is an EMR? I understand there's probably a lot of HR folks on here who understand this and know it. So just bear with me. For those who don't, I'll try to explain it as easily as I can in a way that makes sense. There is a formula which you can get a piece of software to put this formula together. In fact, many of you probably have it. But basically, your employee modification rating is a formula that brings about your payroll and then the cost of your accidents over a certain period of time. And the experience mod, for example, is a 3-year time frame. So it's calculated from your history, right? A 1.0 is considered base. A brand new company who enters the workspace gets a 1.0 rating. And you could land on a 1.0 rating based on the formula. But what does that mean? So if you employ iron workers, for example, I believe, and this could be wrong last time I checked, but every hour that employee is working, you pay $40 towards your workers' compensation. Ironworking is a very hazardous job, right? And they get hurt and the severity is there. So let's say every hour that person works, you're paying $40 towards comp. And let's say you have 100 employees and every hour they work, that means you're paying $400 per hour towards comp. Well, you got to put that 1.0 in there first. So it's $400 for your 10 employees times one, and that's what you're paying per hour for comp. Now, imagine if you had a 1.5 EMR. That means you are 50% more expensive on your comp than your competitor who's a baseline 1.0. So now, in comparison, your 1.5 takes them to what? $600 an hour for comp, where your competitor is 400. That plays for if you have administrative assistants, if you have dentists, if you have barbers. It doesn't matter. There's a formula for each type of task, job, NAICS code, whatever you want to call it. But it absolutely talks about and shows you what you're paying into. And on the flip side, what does it mean if you have a 0.75? Well, that means you're 25% cheaper on at least on the comp stuff as you bid out work, so on your labor, than your competitors. So it's a good idea for us to focus on this. For those of you who are in companies where you need to qualify spending money on safety, this is the infancy stage. This is where you start, right? Start at your EMR. If you have an EMR above a 1.0, tell them, hey, we're paying 10% times this dollar equals this amount of money. So why don't you give me half of that towards the safety budget and I'll save you money. I'm just making that up. Or let's say you're at a 0.75, you could say, look, we spent 10 grand over each year over the last 3 years, drove our safety down. What if we spent 12? Maybe it'll drive it down more, right? We need to find ways to go to our bosses and tell them, here's how we need to spend money in order to improve our safety program. A lot of times we don't do that. Why? Because safety is not a moneymaker, right? You don't see that on the green end of your financial statements. So once you receive your notice, I'll kind of page through this really quickly, because if you're not in this game right now, then it won't make any weight to you. So you have 30 days to make an appointment with a consultant. Again, if you know Walsh, call Walsh. If you don't, call them anyways. And on the outside chance you're happy with whoever your broker is, then you'll have to find a consultant. And I can tell you that there are the brokers around this area, I believe, and I could be wrong, Walsh is probably the only one that has access to as many code rule auditors as they do. So after the report or after the consultation is met, then you have make an appointment with your consultant. They come in, they do their audit, which I'll tell you what that is real quick. And they have to send in a report to the state, goes to your insurance carrier, and then the carrier has to come back to do an evaluation to determine if you have completed what the safety expert thinks is needed for you to improve your EMR. So I'm not going to read this all to you. You can kind of check it out. But when I come in to do a consultation, I actually treat it much like a benchmarking audit, which we'll do for clients that request it, or even new clients that need to figure out where they are with their audit. So things I look at are, first your policies and procedures. Are there any letters or things from the president, the owner, the executive team on their stance when it comes to safety? What training has been conducted and how often is it conducted? Who's conducting it and how are they conducting it? Have you had any accidents? Can I see copies of them? Can we check out the area where they got injured? Can we see, did you capture root cause on the accident, right? How often are you doing audits of your facility? How often are you doing audits of the tasks that your people are doing? And then are you going back and reevaluating those things? And then there's some soft skill stuff, as I call it, although, don't take it the wrong way, very important, but fire extinguisher inspections, AED machines, are they being maintained properly? These are also things I look at when I do the audit. Slips, trips, and falls. Do we have cords running across the floor? All things that we don't think about, because as we work in our daily lives, we just go from our task to task, and if safety is not in our back pocket, we may not focus on it. So here's just an example of the report. Not that it really matters to anybody because you wouldn't see this report. This is what we would do, but just to give you an idea. When the letter goes out, you're going to state to when the carrier comes to reinspect, you're going to either have all these items completed or you're going to have a plan to have them completed. So if the safety expert doing the audit said, you know, hey, you need to tear up all these sidewalks because there's more than an inch of gap and it's a trip and fall hazard. And that's actually against New York State code. You know, that's an expensive thing and you're not going to get that done in 60 days. So you can have a written plan that when they come to re-inspect, you could say, hey, look, here's my plan to finalize these items, and they'll give you a green or a pass. So let's talk about best practices. We always focus on OSHA, right? And OSHA is the minimum compliance. I'm not picking on OSHA by saying that, but it is what it is. They're minimum compliance. You have to meet that minimum threshold to not get into trouble, right? But if we send our kids to school and told them meet the minimum, don't get into trouble, I don't think anybody's ever done that, right? We want to strive for the best because why? It creates a better environment, it creates a higher quality, and it can actually increase and improve productivity. There's statistics out there going both ways. This is what I know to be true. You have to develop a strong culture in safety. It cannot be a buzzword. It can't just be put on your t-shirts. It has to be ingrained in everything you do. Some of the best places I've ever been to don't even focus, they focus on building safety into their next program, building safety into their next piece of equipment or the room, called safety by design. I have 15 people out there acting as safety managers for companies, and we call them white hats. So I assign them to a company, they become Joe Smith of ABC, and they become their safety manager, right? So we do that everywhere. And why is that important? Because companies, A, don't have access to their own safety people, don't know how to employ them. And then when they do have them, don't have anybody that can manage them. But creating that strong culture is important. So you need a strong leader to do that. The safety equipment, the machines and the tools that your people are using are extremely, extremely important. I see a lot of companies, you know, in the military, it was always the buzzword like lowest bidder, right? That's who gets to win the government bids. That's not always the best thing. I can tell you that from experience. So as you buy equipment, machines and tools, make sure that they meet the highest level of safety standard, which is going to be an ANSI standard. If you haven't heard of ANSI, just Google it, ANSI. They basically set the standards for equipment. The world is changing in this, right? I'm on a construction project that just started, a big one in Buffalo here, that they said, you know what, we're not using ladders and we're not using the old style construction helmets. Everybody has to have this new ANSI helmet with a chin strap, right? It's completely changed. People are not happy about it, but they're trying to change into a best practice because they know from their past couple of jobs that those two things prevented more accidents, getting rid of ladders and changing out the helmets. So they employed those things. Develop an effective emergency action plan. I cannot stress that enough. It's not something that you just put on the wall with a couple arrows, a red arrow and a yellow arrow. That's your first way, that's your second way, good luck. No, you got to drill this. And again, it doesn't matter if you're running General Motors or if you have a small dental practice. Many things can happen, you know, the worst case scenarios, but again, less potential for frequency, active shooter, bomb threat, right? But those things happen. Maybe we have a workplace violence event. But then we get into the other things, hurricanes, snowstorms, 7 feet of snow. That was a big problem for many businesses around here. What happened? You all can probably think of stories where this employer said, go, go, go. And then they're like, no, 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 don't leave, don't leave. Now we're locked inside the building. What was their plan? They didn't have one. They shot from the hip, right? Many of these places. You can even talk about your local towns, villages, states. Did you think that they had a good plan going into it? And then we criticize those plans, but why didn't they go well? Because they were not drilled, right? Before I deployed, the week before I deployed in Iraq, I had to put 5,000 bullets through the end of my through the end of my rifle at a range in Kuwait, 5,000 rounds. Why? Because we knew that consistency would help me in game time, as I call it, right? I'm a hockey player as well. I tell my team here it's on ice, off ice, and I mean my team of employees. What do I mean by that? Leadership is tough, but leadership is important, especially in our businesses. and we need to get to know our people. So I always tell them like, hey, we're off the ice. Let's just chat about, your kids. Let's chat about, your farm. But then when we're working, it's like, all right, we're on the ice. We're focused on our job right now. As an employer, we need to have things to look at. We need a chart or a flow as to how we get from A to Z of protection. And again, this goes into best practices. How is this a best practice? Many places I go to and do an audit, I find they go right to PPE. So they probably have some administrative control, maybe in their policies and procedures, but nobody knows about it because they don't train it. So it's to PPE. So we leave everything on the PPE. And we just kind of talked about that. A lot of times employers are buying the cheapest equipment because they don't want to spend the money on the good stuff, because PPE is supposed to be the last line of defense, right? So now we're not spending money on good PPE. And then access to PPE is limited. And then what's the worst part about PPE? It's susceptible to what? We just talked about people taking their glasses off, 500 hospitalizations a year for eyes, human error and human decision, right? So we need to start at the top. So let's look at the top here. Elimination. Eliminate hazards altogether. I've been in many places where we said that machine is from the 60s. Understand that it's going to cost you, it's a capital improvement, but you might want to consider that. Here's what it's costed you in accidents alone over the last 20 years. If you can't eliminate it, can you substitute it, right? So maybe instead of a hand lathe or something like that, it's inside of an enclosed and it's more machine driven. Next, we have engineering controls, right? So if we can't substitute, now we need to control it with an engineering control, meaning a guard or a laser or something to keep that if the people try to cross into the hazard area, there's an actual mechanical control that will stop them or prevent the accident. Then we have administrative controls, obviously less effective. So that would be, it's against the rules for you to step over the yellow line. But again, leaves up to human error and human decision. And then PPE. So developing a strong culture. Culture is such a buzzword that we hear everywhere, right? But what does it mean? To me, it means a team. To me, it means a vision. To me, it means a direction. To me, it means wrapping all those things together and we are all charging in the same direction and we are unified, right? And in that becomes our culture. Again, I can't stress enough leadership involvement. To me, there's a major difference between managers and leaders. Managers can also be leaders. Leaders can be managers. But a lot of times you'll see just management, not leadership. People are smart, right? It doesn't matter what job that they do. People inherently are smart. They can tell when somebody actually cares about them or when they're just checking a box. Leadership is the most important part of safety. If you're not in front of your team, if you are not leading by example, you have your glasses on. And by you, I don't mean, potentially don't mean the folks on this call, although you all are in some sort of leadership role for your teams, I'm guessing. But I'm talking about your executive team, your president, your CEO, their COO. Are these folks, I hate to say it, but are these the folks that you see walking on the shop floor without any PPM because they're in a rush, because they're important, because they're not working on a machine? That sets the wrong example right from the beginning. But what is hard is, how does somebody from your shop floor go to that person and say, hey, sir, you don't have your glasses on? It takes a strong person to do that. I will say, if you find a person in your organization that has done that, or is that type of a person that will go out there and tell people, that should be your new safety person, or they should join your safety team or safety committee. Too many times people are worried about hurting somebody's feelings or getting yelled at. Or more importantly, if I say to you, hey man, I don't think that's safe, and they're like, you don't know what you're talking about, it is, right? So we don't want to tell somebody something that is perceived to be unsafe and then we're wrong. So there's some education in there that is needed. I focused on leadership because I think it's important. So here's 12 things that you can do, your leaders can do, that really make an impact on your people. I'm just going to touch on a couple of them. Make sure to praise and reward. So I'm not talking about a safety incentive program or all that, right? I'm talking about human interaction. Talking about, hey, that's great, good job. Hey, I see you got your harness on it. Thanks for doing that, right? Typically, what we see is, hey, you're not wearing your harness. How come? Right? So again, change into a positive attitude. That's a leadership quality. Don't turn a blind eye to safety. I just talked about that. That is so big for whether you're in a safety leadership role or not. It doesn't matter. If you see something that's unsafe, you have to say something. We talk about it all the time. See something, say something. We equate that to an airport, right? Somebody left a bag, but it really equates to anything in the workplace. Be fair, don't allow double standards. I see that too often on construction sites. There's, they'll go tell a guy he needs to put his glasses on, a girl, guy or girl, and they will go screaming at them because they've had the terrible day and they, all they care about is the glasses. And then you'll watch that nobody will go back to that person and correct them because they don't want to be yelled at. So we need to take care of those things right away. So you have to initially get with your employees, make sure that they understand where you're coming from, a position of care. And I'm also going to tell you that they need to respect you in order to listen to you and to take your word, and you need to show them respect. But respect, unfortunately, for leaders is much harder to be gained. They will test and test and test. And why are they testing you? Because they, just like your children at home, they need to test to see if you're going to run away, in essence, right? They need to test to see if you're the leader that will stand the test of time. I talked a little bit about machines and tools, but their importance in safety is massive. So we're going to keep going over this here. One thing, if you have not done this, it's required and you should do it. If you need help, obviously reach out to your contact at Walsh and or your safety team or consultant. But you have to be doing risk assessments based on your equipment, right? Job assessments and hazard assessments, and then PPE assessments. But we need to check the equipment and the machines and the tools that people are using before they use them to make sure they meet minimum standard or meet those standards, right? So those ANSI standards, the required standards, right? We need to make sure that they've not been altered. This is a major problem in construction, but I've also seen it in manufacturing. And if everybody right now thinks about the last time they toured their facility or their site, did you see something that was quote unquote job made or job altered? What do I mean by that? So I've seen aerial lifts where people build a little basket and they stick it inside of it so they can gain some height inside the basket. Can't do that. Seen ones where people have taken forklifts and built their own little stand so they can hoist themselves up to paint a ceiling. Can't do that. We cannot alter the equipment as it was given to us from the manufacturer's specs, right? So that's so important. If you need to do that, if it's that important, or you have no other way to get the job done than to alter a piece of equipment that you purchased from a manufacturer, you need to go to the manufacturer and say, here's my problem, how can I fix it? They're going to tell you can't do it because it'll take an act of their law team to tell you can change their equipment and have it still be warranted, right? So all that is in play. And then B, you've probably got to get an engineer so that your company is safe and can have the insurance required or still be indemnified and insured for that piece of equipment. So my notion to you is don't change equipment. Make sure your employees know that. Now, people change equipment to try to help them do their job better, right? Sometimes it's the wrong way. I've seen, and you may have as well, people who disable guards on machines because it's just hard to do the job with the guard, according to them. Safety training is of utmost importance for employees, whether they're new employees or existing employees, right? It sets the standard and it sets the stage for your company and your team, again, into that culture, right? So we need to tell and instruct our people on skills that we expect them to do. Tasks, do they need to go to a school to get extra training? Is it specialized, right? We need to blend our training solutions. So I'm a big proponent of first time you hear or learn something should be in person and should have as much hands-on as possible. Second time or maybe it's an annual refresher. Okay, go to either live instructor or go to a straight online course, and then switch it up the next year. Put somebody back into the classroom with your people. Otherwise, you're just going to create rote script and mundaneness. I won't go too much into this, but I did kind of talk about the emergency action plan and how important it is for many reasons. You know, catastrophic events happen because we're not prepared for them. You know, and you have to think through every possibility. I would say 80% of the code rule audits that I've done, and I think I did at least 15 this year. On average, my company does about 40 to 45 a year. But in about 80% of the ones I've done, I've found exit doors either partially or completely blocked. And again, it didn't matter if this was a doctor's office with 3 exit doors, manufacturing with 10, or even one that just had 2, right? We have this thing where we just pile stuff in front of doors. Maybe it gets shipped into us and it's like, just throw it by the door. That's gone wrong in so many different ways for so many different people. So keep your emergency action plan active, keep drilling it, keep testing it, and audit based on the things around it, right? So exit doors, fire extinguishers, things like that. Just a quick table to kind of show you the upside downness of unsafe acts in relation to, you know, OSHA notifiable events. Again, we just know from history that, you know, reporting unsafe acts and conditions can absolutely prevent lost time injuries, because when we can focus on a condition that could have turned into an accident, we're in the right place. We kind of chatted about this on a previous slide, but the average cost of a claim is around $40,000 to $50,000. You can see here the different types of accidents and their costs. Okay, so we're going to talk about some KPIs really quickly, as I call them, key performance indicators or metrics. So we're going to get a little bit more into leading and lagging stuff, but, you know, lag time, these are all things to consider. Claim conversion rates, the closure rate. I will tell you that you work with your Walsh contact on your closures, have active conversations about that. The same as your claims, you know, if you have questions about them, if you have questions about, you know, a claim that might still be open, ask. There's nothing wrong with having those conversations and getting that information. So I'm going to buzz through these a little bit, but we put together kind of 5 different things that we feel can help you drive your comp down. Number 1 is pre-hire and pre-hire and new hire. So the old adage is fire fast, hire slow. Why do we do that? You know, when we buy into an employee, it's a pretty costly endeavor for us. We're actually then, you know, putting somebody into our culture. Maybe they're toxic. Any of you sports players out there, there's talk about toxic sports players and how they affect teams. So we need to have good interviews. And then we also probably need to consider pre-employment physicals if these are manual jobs, so that we're not dealing with, or we can identify with, previously existing conditions people might have, again, if they're getting into a labor intensive job or an ergonomic intensive job. So the beginning of your safety endeavor has to start with a program, right? So that some call the program, which is made up of your policies. But at face value, what we need to do is develop the program that sets the stage, again, at minimum OSHA compliance, for how we conduct business in our workplace. I will tell you, I get this question all the time. Can I just go online and buy one for $200 and put my name on it? Of course you can. It will be nothing more than a wasted $200 though. All companies do is they slap their name on that, put it on the shelf, and they say, well, if OSHA comes, now we have a manual we can show them. But their employees have never heard a word out of that. Put your time and effort and resources into developing your policies and procedures. That sets the stage for the rest of your program. Excuse me. Nope, wrong slide. Training. We need to then train to that policy, procedure, and the standard, right? Training, we always want to try to look for best practices. We want to talk about things that happened in relatable industries so that we can help people understand what they're doing, why they're doing it, and how it plays into their role. But training is imperative. A couple of things about training that I'm shocked to hear as I go out there from HR folks and not safety people is people are not keeping records of training, which is baffling to me. You spend all this money to put your people through training that's required and we don't keep records, or we're keeping records by sliding a piece of paper into their file. It's 2023. Everything else we do in life is digital. Your training records need to be digitized. Again, that's a best practice that's being used across the industry now. If you're not doing that, it can be done pretty easily. But yeah, I would highly recommend that. And then when you put your employee on the job, so now the employee's on a job, now what do we do with them? So we've hired them, we've made sure they're physically fit to do the job. We trained that, we showed them our policies, procedures, we trained them. Now what do we do? Do things, focus on their job, audit them, talk to them about their job. How's it going? How do you feel? Does anything not feel right? You know, maybe they're at a desk, they want to stand. Maybe they need a mat under their feet. Talk about providing breaks. Job rotations, right? Job rotation is massive for a couple of reasons. One is the ergonomic aspect, but also the mental aspect. Promote a culture of care is important, very, very, very important to driving your costs down. Root cause analysis, we won't get into that much here, probably good for another seminar, but root cause is huge to help us determine leading indicators, which is where we are, leading and lagging indicators. I'm gonna touch on this quickly. This is a very deep topic, but I just want to give you kind of a quick once over of it. So leading indicators are proactive by nature. They provide a framework for benchmark behaviors and activities. Lagging indicators are ones from past, right? So I kind of use this notion of lagging indicators are depressing, right? Things that happened in the past, they depress us. Somebody got hurt, we lost an employee, cost us a lot of money. Leading indicators are anxiety, right? So we're worried about what could happen. Well, how do we alleviate that anxiety? And how do we get rid of that depression? In essence, we have to look at the lagging indicators, things that happened in the past, to determine what changes we need to make to prevent those, right? So some leading indicators here are some examples. Big one I'll touch on here is safety meetings. I don't think that companies do enough safety meetings, or they don't boil safety into their other meetings. There's no reason safety can't be part of your HR production meeting. There's no reason. It should be talked about all the time. I hear, oh, we have a quarterly safety meeting. That's a check the box, 100%. That's a company that doesn't understand the importance of their safety program and how it can play into the health and wellness of their people, but also the financials of the company. Here's a couple of tasks and measures for leading indicators. I'll leave this here. I know that everybody's going to get this presentation, so you can dig into this a little bit more. Lagging indicators, again, things from the past. So citations, fatality rates, fatalities, workers' compensation claims. It's pretty obvious, but lagging indicators are pretty easy to spot. You know, something happened, maybe we have records or dashboards about it, but they're harder to change, right? And here we are with, again, I'm going to leave this to your eyes and to be able to read it later. So focus on what's wrong with focus on lagging indicators and what to do instead. Focus on leading indicators. Again, I'll let you read through this, but it's important to look at both from my standpoint, to tell you that it's important to look at both, but you need to benchmark yourself and start. If you overwhelm with too much data, you won't be able to move forward with a plan. So, you know, our notion in the military, and it's one that I brought into my business, is identify a problem, come up with a hasty plan, begin executing and adjust fire as you need, right? If it's a big problem that's going to cause bigger things, then the plan might need to be fleshed out more before you go at it. But sometimes hitting the nail quickly on the head is the best way to combat some of these issues. When people in your business see you really focused on a previous injury or putting resources to fix something from a previous injury, that makes the world to them. And I'm just going to give you a 10-second commercial here to pretty much round out the program. So we have this app, Telesafety. Walsh clients have access to this. They just reach out to your brokers. Basically, it puts a virtual safety expert in your pocket to triage your questions, concerns, by taking pictures, putting text in real time, 10 minutes or less. So if you don't have access to safety people on your team, maybe you're wearing a safety hat as the HR person, I would implore you to call your Walsh people, put this app in your pocket, put it in your employees' pockets. What else does it do? So we worked with Walsh and we said, what are some of the pain points of your clients? And we talked about accident, incident, property damage reporting. So we've baked that in here. That's a picture of it on the right. But how do we help you guys through this? Well, we know that if we put this data in there, accidents, property damage reporting, that you still have to do OSHA reports. So and you have to do your workers' comp reports. So we've automated from our accident incident reporting an OSHA 300, as you can see on the screen there in the middle, as well as your New York State C2. So if you're doing your accidents in our app, with the click of a couple buttons, you have an OSHA 300 automatically generated, and you have and then you can have a New York State C2 auto generated per accident that goes in there. Saves you a lot of time and effort. And then the last thing, again, really important for our employees, toolbox training. So we've built in some little vignette-based training stuff in here. Again, this isn't a sales commercial. This is access. Walsh clients have access to this. So you just need to ask. I will pause the screen here with my contact. The Walsh contact is John Summer. His information is up there as well. So if you don't have a warm contact at Walsh yet, he's a good contact. And then there's my information as well. Appreciate everybody. Yep, thanks.
For anyone who doesn't know, I'm John Summer here, and we'll thank Joe for his time here today. And we do have a few questions, Joe, if you still have some time for us.
I do.
And if there's anyone that has a question that is not yet submitted, there is a Q&A box that you can type in a question, and we'll get through as many as we can here with Joe for the time that we have remaining. First question here, Joe. Do all companies need to have a safety manual? You touched on those safety manuals a little bit. Is that something that's required of all companies?
Yes, you need to have, the simple answer is yes, you need to have safety policies in a program that meet with the job and tasks that you're doing on a daily basis. Yeah.
All right. You mentioned that the meeting quarterly about safety is kind of just a checking the box type of situation. What's your recommendation about how often companies should be conducting safety meetings?
That's a good question. My suggestion is as often as you're talking operations, as often as you're talking HR, you're talking safety. Now, are you talking all levels of safety? No, but maybe in those HR meetings where you have an executive team, you're talking about the accidents, the claims, and the costs, and potentially prevention, right? And then with your operations team, you're talking as well prevention. You're going to talk history of accidents, so they can go to their operators and tell them this has happened in the past. Here's how we need to prevent it. But then, most importantly, what I find in those meetings, we're adding 15 minutes to it, but you're going to find some amazing answers on how to mitigate accidents from your employees. Again, boots on the ground is huge. No matter what industry you work in, the folks that are on the ground doing the work have a lot of actionable intelligence that we need to get from them. The only way we get that is to communicate. So that my recommendation is as often as possible, minimally monthly.
Okay, another question here is, we don't have regularly scheduled safety meetings, but what is a good first point, first step to starting a safety team or safety program?
Well, I mean, yeah, so if you have no safety programming, maybe you've walked into a business and as a new hire and you've found out, maybe you're the HR team and you find out there's nothing exists. I think a lot of us initially are going to hit Google, right? Which is what we do in everything in our life. And you're going to find that $200 manual on there, and that's going to be like, okay, here's what we need to do. My notion to you is to slow down, call your Walsh contact and have a discussion with them. And then they'll draw us in, and we can help as well. But if let's just say you're on an island, you need to run this on your own. You need to develop policies first. So start with the most hazardous things, tasks, equipment that your team does, develop a policy around it. And then continue to develop policies from the highest hazard down. So, if I'm a roofer, fall protection is my first policy. And, bloodborne pathogen is probably one of my last ones. Why? Because the severity and the frequency are there. So you develop your policies and programs, then you need some teeth. So you got to get your executive team to buy into it. And then you need to train your employees on your standards that you've laid out in your policy. And then you need to audit the effectiveness of both your policy and of your employees' ability to follow those policies. That's what I would recommend. And then it's just rinse, wash, and repeat. You check your policies and programs when you audit them, and then you change them as needed.
Thank you. So that's actually all the questions that we had submitted here. So thank you to everyone who joined us today for today's webinar. Joe, thank you for sharing your insight and expertise. Hope you all enjoyed this presentation. And if you have any additional questions or would like to connect directly with Walsh Duffield or the OFVA team, feel free to reach out directly to myself, Joe Coniglio, or your representative at Walsh Duffield. We're available to help with any of your risk management, insurance, or employee benefits needs. Thank you again for joining us today, and hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day. Take care.
Thank you.